Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the Land Links webinar series with this episode today on school streets and how we manage demand and involve the community in reducing traffic and protecting schools from air pollution. We have an absolutely fantastic panel who will be sharing a lot of content and ideas with you today. And we also have a great Q&A session for the end of the webinar. So during the session, please do add your questions as we progress. To begin with, and before we introduce the panel, I'm going to share just a few thoughts on the subject of school transport. For those of you that are not familiar with the Global Action Plan, we are an NGO that believes that what's good for the planet is good for people. And we encourage and help organizations and individuals to reduce their environmental impact and get a handle on air quality. And nowhere, nobody has been untouched by the COVID-19 crisis. So the first thing that I wanted to share was some insights that have come through from the polling that we've carried out recently, and then I'll come on to share information about how we're helping schools in particular to address air quality. So the few statistics I just wanted to share with you, which I think nicely frame this conversation, all lead back to the fact that there is majority support for active travel and lower traffic levels in communities across the UK. In a poll that we carried out during lockdown, we found that 62% of the population would like the government and local authorities to invest in traffic reduction and air quality measures more urgently than before the outbreak. In transport, a reduction in car levels in cities. And so when we asked how much of a priority it should be for the centre of cities to be car free, we found that 67% said that they think it should be a high or medium priority for the very centre of cities to be car free versus 28% that thought it should be low or no priority. And specifically on schools, 70% said that they thought closing the roads outside schools should be a high or moderate priority, and 26% saying low or no priority. Really importantly, drivers agree. The percentage agreeing that roads should be closed outside of schools wherever possible was 68% amongst drivers, and it was 70% in the whole population, so barely any difference. And the final statistic I wanted to share was that in working from home, the revolution that we've all experienced, while it's not all roses, there is a huge majority of people would like to continue working from home to some degree, and perhaps that could help with the school run. So I'll just now jump on to schools and air quality. If we could have the previous slide, please. There are two things that we are doing a Global Action Plan to help. The first is that we've just launched the Clean Air for Schools framework, which answers the question for any head teacher, any parent, any governor board, what should we do in our school to best reduce air pollution from a range of all the measures that could be taken. And this is a free to download piece of research endorsed by a lot of organisations who've been involved in pulling this together. And there are three elements identified by the pictures here. There's the education of pupils. Here you can see head teacher Steve Marsland in the Russell Scott Primary in Denton exploring an air pollution monitor. We then have collective action to reduce the pollution that the school has some control over. Here you see a school bus. And finally, there's advocacy and children using their voice to campaign for a reduction in pollution that they don't necessarily have direct control over. So you can download that now. If you go to the Global Action Plan website, if you Google the Clean Air for Schools framework, you will find it. And then finally, I also wanted to just highlight that one of our favourite days of the year is just coming on the next slide, please. It is Clean Air Day in just over a fortnight tomorrow. So this is the annual day where we celebrate action on air pollution, and we demonstrate that a clean air world, clean air communities are better for all, both in our health and in so many ways, from more connected communities through to safer streets and mental health benefits too. And so I would just encourage you all to do what you all always do, which is to join in, whether you're a local authority, a school, a business, a campaigning body. There are all sorts of ways that you can get involved in Clean Air Day, from helping people understand the issue of air pollution using the Clean Air Hub, through to trying a school street for the day if you've not tried it in your school. If you're a business, confirming to people how you are going to help them in working from home, as that is likely to be with us for a long time. And also, if you are a charity, you could celebrate the benefits of clean air in your community, have a very positive vision of how air pollution action can improve our local communities and our way of life for all. So I look forward to everyone joining in and hopefully getting Clean Air Day trending on Twitter, as it has done since the campaign began with all of your support 4 years ago now. So I hope that was a helpful beginning to this conversation, and I hope we have a lively debate as we go through. So I'll now introduce the panel, who will each take around 7 or 8 minutes to share their views on ensuring that the way that we travel around schools leads to a good quality of life for all. And as we go through this panel, don't forget you can add questions in the question panel, in your control panel for this whole webinar. You will also see this session is being recorded, and so if you need to check in on it again later on, you will be able to access it after the session. So I will introduce all the speakers as we go through the session. We have a fantastic panel with us today. I'm delighted to say we are starting with a double team, a double act of Marla and Adrienne, who will be sharing their insights on this topic from Atkins, where they work as transport planners. And so I'm going to hand over first of all to Marla.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, everyone.
Can we have the first slide, please? Good afternoon. My name is Adrienne Mathews. With my colleague Mala, we'll be presenting on getting back to school safely and sustainably using a case study on our work with Slough Council. Next slide, please. This is us. I'm a principal transport planner. Mala is a senior transport planner within Atkins Transportation. Next slide, please. So as we've all observed, the COVID-19 pandemic has seen major changes to all aspects of life. Lockdown restrictions in place from spring and ongoing social distancing requirements have meant to rethink of how we do just about everything, including travel. Obviously, lockdown restrictions were driven for public health reasons rather than sustainability, but it has become, let's say, the largest ever forced travel behavioral change event. So quite interesting from that perspective. Next slide, please. With most people at home and schools and non-essential businesses closed, we would have all noticed a really steep drop in vehicle traffic and public transport demand during lockdown restrictions, but probably increases in cycling, which have been quite peaky and largely at weekends, but remarkable nonetheless, as it really indicates a potential. Road traffic has obviously been creeping back as people have eased back to shops and holidays, now to work and obviously to school in the past sort of week or so. And and public transport demand remains very low as people follow the government guidance to avoid it if possible. Public transport capacity has also obviously been greatly reduced as requirements for social distancing has greatly limited the number of users and commuters who can travel on public transport, and a lot of people just still don't trust that it's safe. Obviously, larger questions around the impact of the public transport system more broadly and how commuters will travel in the near future, but we'll focus on school travel today. Next slide, please. With schools back in September after 6 months off, we have some new challenges now in getting pupils back to school safely and sustainably, given this really changing and very uncertain landscape. In particular, due to requirements for the 1 meter plus social distancing and other COVID-19 related measures that reduce carrying capacity, it's been anticipated that the return to educational trips on the transport network would cause demand for some modes to outstrip supply. According to the DFT, almost half of morning peak journeys in normal times are made for educational purposes. But now with public transport capacity constrained, alternative safe transport options need to be planned and implemented and communicated to parents, children, and transport operators to enable a smoother return to education. Next slide, please. To support this, the Department for Transportation and Department of Transport and Department for Education have both produced guidance, which is encouraging pupils to walk and cycle as a priority. In early August, the Department for Education set out guidance for transport to school, so that's public transport and dedicated school transport, which set a target for 50% of journeys to school that are 2 miles or less currently made by public bus to switch to active travel modes. So obviously walking, cycling, and scooting. This would obviously help accommodate bus users with longer journeys as well as social distancing measures. But what we'll be talking about today is the DFT's Travel Demand Management Toolkit, which was published in late July of this year and follows a 5-step process for producing an effective TDM plan. This is largely in line with traditional TDM measures, but specific to the context of COVID-19 and school travel. Obviously being published in late July, as you can see here on the document, did present quite a challenge for local authorities to implement before September, where we are now. Next slide, please. We have been supporting SLAU and other local authorities in preparing TDM plans for the return to school. And I'll now pass on to Mala, who will tell us more about the work we've been doing for SLAU Borough Council.
Great, thank you, Adrienne, for the background and context. Afternoon, everyone. Hope everything is well, and thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon. So before I go on to the support that we gave SLAU Borough Council with regards to this initiative, I thought I'd introduce SLAU, just in case there are some colleagues that are not familiar with the town or haven't had the opportunity to visit. So on your screen now, you'll see a number of facts and figures regarding SLAU. I won't go these into too much detail, but the town is blessed with some excellent transport links by rail, the Great Western Railway, and hopefully Crossrail in the future. By road, the M4 and the M25 just to the east, and by air, Heathrow Airport also to the east. And hopefully you can see from the facts and figures on screen that SLAU has an extremely successful and productive economy. So SLAU Trading Estate is home to a number of international and national firms, such as Mars, the telecoms firm O2, and the logistics company DHL. SLAU also boasts the highest concentration of global corporate HQs outside of London, so HTC, another telecoms firm, and the car manufacturer Fiat have their offices in SLAU. And SLAU's been voted the best place to work in the UK for a 2nd year in a row, and has one of the highest business startup rates in the country. SLAU was pre-COVID a thriving cultural scene, and also has a culturally diverse population, which reflects a number of faith schools that are in SLAU. So it's a place of change, and the pace of change has never been faster. There are billions of pounds of investment being made in regeneration, which will result in new leisure facilities, lots of new homes, a new cultural centre and amazing new school buildings. Next slide, please. Taking a while, I think, the tech. There we go. Right, okay. So I'll take you through the 5 steps and the support that we were able to offer the council. So the first step is to collect and analyse data to find out where the transport issues are on the transport network and where there are capacity issues. And we did this in 2 steps. So we had a look at the national picture and then had a look at local data, so tapping into the Access Fund, which Slough Borough Council are currently running. And I'll talk about the Slough Access Fund in a little bit more detail on the next few slides. So in terms of the national picture, we had a look at the National Travel Survey and what it was telling us, in particular the 2019 edition. And walking and travelling by car are the most popular modes for primary school children and walking for secondary school children. What was interesting is there's been no significant variation in the mode of share of travel for both primary and secondary school children. So the tending travel as they've travelled since 2009. And something else that the data showed us was that primary school children complete shorter trips to school than secondary school children due to size of catchment. So primary schools tend to have smaller catchments. And the key observation, an interesting observation that we made, was that only a small proportion of trips under 2 miles to primary school and secondary schools are made by bicycle. But something else that was of interest is that this is not due to an access to a bicycle. So 83% of primary school students have access to a bicycle, as do 69% of secondary school children. So one can assume that the reason why these shorter trips are not done by bicycle is due to other reasons, other motivations or issues or barriers. Then looking at the local picture, so we tapped into the Access Fund data that Slough Borough Council have amassed over the years, and we're able to compare it to what was shown nationally. So an example of that is the graph on the right, the mode of travel to primary schools. And we can see that primary school children in Slough walk and cycle far more to school compared to the national average, which sets a fantastic backdrop to promote active travel in the borough. Now, I'm sure most of you have been hearing multiple times across the last few weeks is that public buses generally now have reduced capacity due to accommodate social distancing, and some bus companies, including the ones in Slough, are providing additional services targeted towards pupils and others providing duplicate services. So this has been the case in Slough. A number of additional or duplicate bus services have been put in place, and we have found that the majority of schools will benefit from those services, as shown on the next slide, please. So next slide, please, sorry. So we did a mapping exercise, which we put oh, sorry, if you could go back to the previous slide. Great, thank you. So we did a mapping exercise of the additional and duplicate bus services against the location of schools, as you can see, and put a 400-metre buffer, which is the grey kind of blobs around the bus routes, which indicates approximately a 5-minute walk. And we found that the majority of schools will actually benefit from these services. So for whatever reason, if pupils are unable to complete their journey on active modes, they can take advantage of these bus services. Next slide, please. So I did mention the Access Fund, which Slough have had in place, and Slough have a fantastic track record of implementing sustainable transport measures, firstly from the LSTF, Local Sustainable Transport Fund, and now the Access Fund. So the Access Fund is run or managed under the branding or the banner of Better By, so better by public transport, better by cycling, better by walking, or better by car sharing. And it was only natural for us and colleagues at Slough to look at the Access Fund and determine which measures we could transfer for this particular initiative. So for general, we had staggered start times and finish times at school, a communications campaign, which include redeveloping and refreshing a school travel pack, Walking included personalised travel planning, bespoke travel maps, walking buses, which were developed and implemented in collaboration with the Active Slough team. For cycling, there was bikeability training, review of on-site cycle parking in terms of is there enough, is it adequate? Public transport, as I've just mentioned, the provision of duplicate or additional bus services and hand sanitisers at all bus stops. And these measures were documented in a comprehensive TDM action plan alongside a separate stakeholder engagement plan, as there are many stakeholders in Slough and their role would vary between developing, implementing and monitoring measures. So we felt that a separate stakeholder engagement plan would capture that, and a comprehensive comms plan, which I'll also touch on later. Next slide, please. So the sharp-eyed of you or eagle-eyed of you will notice that I've gone from step 2 right to step 4. So step 3 was implementation of measures, which was largely led by colleagues at Slough Borough Council because the Access Fund already had the established delivery and implementation frameworks in place. So we provided and developed, created a suite of marketing materials that schools could use to disseminate messages, especially the key message of getting to and from school safely and sustainably. So we developed posters, one for secondary schools and one for primary schools, beg your pardon. An outside banner which could be used to communicate with parents, carers and legal guardians as they dropped their children off, and a series of pavement stickers which schools could use either at entry or exit points or perhaps within schools to aid internal circulation. And we use the Better By branding because it meant that people actually associate messages with a well-known established brand, and there would be continuity and consistency in the message. Next slide, please. So the last step is to monitor, evaluate and adapt the measures. It's important to understand what's worked, what hasn't worked, and lessons learned. So working with colleagues at Slough, we identified a number of monitoring streams which are on your screens now, and we helped develop a series of tools to collate and capture the data. And I won't go through each of these monitoring streams now because hopefully most of them are self-explanatory, but something I'd like to point out that it's useful to get a wide range of data. So trying to touch base with as many stakeholders as possible, like bus operators and head teachers, understanding how the key audiences experienced the issues and the measures, and using any existing monitoring infrastructure in place that the council may have, such as the ATC network. And it's also useful to understand what's happened on the softer side of things, so the comms side, and understanding what's worked and what hasn't worked there. And Slough Borough Council are in the process of collating this data as we speak. Next slide, please. And just to finish on some challenges and tips, so challenges on the left-hand side first. So even though the Access Fund over the last 3 and a bit years had collected a rich and depth and a range of data, there was still a lack of local data because it is historically difficult and challenging to engage with schools as they've got competing priorities and resources. And if we don't have a full set of local data, we don't have a full picture of what's going on at the local transport network and where the issues may be. As with many places, Slough has multiple bus operators and stakeholders, so trying to get everyone engaged, involved and singing from the same hymn sheet. I personally have a lot of members of my family that work in the education sector in some capacity or another, and just having spoken to them in the last few weeks, you realise just how many things schools had to take into consideration when they opened earlier this month. So there's multiple priorities for schools. So where does transport figure in that? Have they thought about it? Are they able to get involved and share data and implement measures their end? And as Adrienne mentioned, the toolkit was only released at the end of July, so there was a race against time to progress and implement measures. However, let's end on a positive note. And even though there were challenges in managing public transport demand, given reduced capacity requirements to accommodate social distancing, there was a clear opportunity here to promote, increase and encourage the number of active travel journeys that were made for schools. And just to quickly finish off some tips, lessons learned for future work. Collaboration and partnership working is key to try and get things off the ground. Engaging with schools is important, as all schools are unique in terms of location, access to the transport network, number of pupils, pupils mix. So try and get them involved as much as you can and understand where they're coming from. Start as early as possible to implement things, as it can take a while for measures to embed, and monitoring of solutions. So as I just mentioned, trying to get that range of data so you can truly understand what's working and what's not, and implementing early so you get a more robust data set. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today at the webinar, and happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Thank you very much. Plenty of information there for everyone to ask questions about. I see I have some questions in already, but there's room for some more. Imogen Leonard, your question will definitely be asked and answered later on, so stay tuned. Now we move on to Alison Litherland, who is in the team at Sustrans, working on that very emotive subject of engagement, how we bring everyone along on this subject and make school travel work well for everyone. Over to you, Alison.
Hello everyone. If we could go to my first slide, please. So I'm from Sustrans. I have spent the last 8 years of my life working with primary schools, trying to support them to get more children walking and cycling. I've done that in some very different settings. I am from the northeast, so I started off working in Gateshead, and I'm now in the London team. So I've worked with schools in Brent and Tower Hamlets. So I know that there's lots of different types of schools. If we could move on to my next slide, please. Over the last few years, our schools projects have started to focus more on school streets, and I just wanted to really pick up what school streets aim is. Their aim is to create a safe environment for children to travel to school, and therefore it's really important to consider children as the key stakeholders in a school street, and actually the key ambassadors for the change that we want to see, because they can be amazing ambassadors for active travel. I'm going to go through how we've approached this in our schools projects, how we've approached trying to get schools and also boroughs initially on board, although now all the boroughs are really excited about school streets, which is great, and just trying to make the case for school streets within this community. We can have my next slide, please. So we start off by working with the young people to educate them on why an environment with less cars might be positive. So in London, we focus a lot on air pollution, because in the borough where I work, children's lung capacity is actually 20% smaller, or 20% less than it would be if they were living in a less polluted environment. And talking to the young people about that and giving them some autonomy and showing them how they can avoid having to breathe in so much polluted air by traveling down quiet routes, but also getting them to go home and talk to their grown-ups. So when we teach them about air pollution, we get them to complete a letter home to their grown-ups at the end of the session that talks to their grown-ups about the impact that air pollution is having on them, and ask their grown-ups to take action to make a change. In other places where air pollution is less of a problem, we can focus on road safety as well. And we also, being Sustrans, always focus on the many benefits of active travel, that it's fun, and that it gives them a chance to get healthy. Move on to my next slide, please. And what we tend to find once we've worked with these young people is that they become really evangelized about making changes. As we know from seeing the climate protests, young people really care about having a better world for them to grow up in, and they're great ambassadors. There's something else that's really important here, that the messaging from young people to their community seems to work a lot better than messaging from some outside source. So we get the children to create flyers and posters about air pollution. They do parent coffee mornings. We've also had them create banners to put up in front of their schools, asking for people to create a cleaner, greener environment for them to live in. And they've also gone to give presentations to local residents groups. And this slide, the picture at the bottom here is actually young people going to a housing association and giving a presentation to the local housing association about why they want a cleaner and greener environment around them and to live in. If we can have my next slide, please. Another really important part of what we do when we're trying to prepare the ground for a school street is make active travel achievable. It isn't always achievable for everybody, and lots of people feel that walking and cycling isn't for people like me. So we do lots of engagement with teachers, with parents, with pupils, giving them the skills so that they can cycle, skills so that they can walk, skills that they can fix their own bikes. And also we work with the young people to create local walking mats and looking at clean air routes to their school. We'll move on to the next slide, please. We also then work on making it desirable. So with the school community, we'll run lots of fun competitions to reward active travel. So we've got some super simple ones where we've got a lock that we cover in gold tape, very high tech. And we get a group of pupils to go out once a week and lock it to a bike or scooter. The child who finds that on their bike or scooter wins a prize. It is amazing to see the increase in bikes and scooters in a school after 1 week of running this competition. It really increases the levels of walking and cycling hugely, and it's so simple. We also have our national big pedal competition where schools compete against each other to see which schools can have the highest school roll for walking and cycling to school. And then we run lots of one-off fun events like decorate your bike and bring it to school, we'll give you a prize, or come to school, walking, cycling and scooting, and you get a free breakfast snack. And all of these small little incentives that schools can run themselves, or you can go in and run with a school, really increase the number of people that are walking and cycling to school. And we move on to the next slides, please. And so all of the stuff that I've talked about up until now is kind of the groundwork. A lot of what we do is tend not to talk about the street until we've sort of set the groundwork for winning over hearts and minds to actually, I might want to walk and cycle to school. And then we start talking about the road in front of the school and the barriers that that road gives those families to walking and cycling to school. We teach the young people about the Healthy Streets indicators and get them to look at roads that have been improved and see if they can spot what has changed on those roads. We then go out onto the road in front of the school with the young people and we get them to evaluate their school street, and we get them to think about what that road is like when they are walking and cycling to school. We then get them to present their findings to their grown-ups and get them to start that discussion about the road in front of the school and how we could change it to make a better environment for those young people traveling to the school. At that point, we quite often like to then run a play street. And with the play street, we'll always get the pupils to write the letters to the local residents asking if they can have the road closed because they would like to breathe clean air for a day. And at the play street, that's normally when we start engaging with the wider community of residents outside of the school, talking to them about the benefits to the school community, but also to local residents. We tend to find that lots of local residents have lots of problems with all that traffic jam that happens at the school gates, and are quite keen on the idea of maybe removing that from where they live. However, they're not super keen on roads being closed. So we try to focus more on the benefits of what is given to them rather than what is taken away. And this process then kind of runs concurrently. So we would then start working with local residents, equipping them with skills to walk and cycle, pop-up stores on the street, getting the young people to go out with us and talk to people about the school street that's coming, to keep that process going and keep consulting everybody about what's coming and how it's going to have a positive impact on the local community. I haven't talked much about COVID because a lot of the delivery that I've talked about here happened pre-COVID, but we have got teams at the moment that have done a lot of this stuff during COVID-19. So all of the educate stage we've done through remote learning. We've done reaching out through to the wider community through getting the pupils to create letters that go out to local residents, banners to go up in front of the schools. So we are still able to do some of these things in this situation, but we are maybe having to wind back some of the more face-to-face stuff. Last slide, please. So thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer any questions later. Thank you. Bye.
Wow, thank you so much, Alison. There's a huge amount there. It's sparked quite a few questions I can see about the real practicalities of how we win those hearts and minds, including the older folk, not just the younger folk. So thank you very much, Alison, and stay around please for the questions at the end. Now, please do keep those questions coming. I've got a lot and I'm certainly not going to have any chance to ask any of my own. So thank you for the questions that are in already, but please do keep them coming. And so we have our penultimate speaker, who is Natan Santibáñez. And Natan, you can correct my pronunciation perhaps and introduce yourself as well at the University College of London Centre for Transport Studies.
Thank you, Chris. It's Natan Santibáñez. I know it's quite difficult sometimes. So good afternoon, everybody, and many thanks for the invitation. I'm very glad to share with you the selection of findings from my research about encourage children's walking trips, understanding the impacts of the built environment, done at the Center of Transport Studies at UCL. Can you go through the first slide, please? So that serves as the introduction. Can you go to the next slide? So as widely known, encouraging children walking to school has many benefits. From a health perspective, children exercise more, decreasing the risk of suffering from disease associated with sedentary lifestyle like diabetes, obesity, hypertension. Moreover, unaccompanied walking trips benefit children's psychological development by increasing self-consciousness, self-worth, and problem resolution. It can improve children's environmental knowledge while developing key navigation skills like geographical orientation, and can strengthen the social skills needed to interact with other individuals present in the streets. Furthermore, children's walking trips can help decrease the number of car trips in the city while reducing the pressure on caregivers' schedules and the road network as well. Children benefit from this constant contact with the public realm, yet the number of walking trips had decreased compared with previous generation. There's a really good work about from Hillman that these guys did, and the following ones from Shaw that expose how they have changed here in London. These reasons behind these trends have multiple explanations, including the role played by the configuration and design of the cities that have become increasingly hostile for children. However, there is still space to increase walking mode share. In that line, my research study identifies barriers to children walking by investigating the factors in the built environment, that is, the constructed features of the streets that are important for a trip. The research method for this purpose to investigate these factors comprise two main stages. First, a qualitative inquiry of existing street environments based on interviews conducted with children aged 6 to 16 years old and their caregivers in the cities of Santiago, Chile, and here in London. And a second stage that consists of an hypothetical investigation of the reactions to different built environments. Next slide, please. So the evidence suggests that the built environment affects 4 aspects of children's walking experience: navigation, the sensorial experience, perception of risk, and the fear of traffic. Next slide, please. Regarding children's navigation, the landmarks in the environment provide a sense of direction and novelty to homogeneous neighborhoods. These are composed by singular features that cause children attentions assigned with generic connotation, for example, good, neutral, bad, or as symbols of past experience. In the image of the right, you can see a sketch of a street in London with different physical features. In this example, I highlighted in blue, in dark blue, the pub, as students may recognize this pub for navigation and purposes if they're in the local environment. Other relevant features that they could identify are local facilities as shops, singular buildings like museums or all industries, parks and recreational spaces, the topography of an area like hills, canals, among others. Next slide, please. On the side of the sensorial experience, it consists in the physical features available in the environment affecting children's experience that can evoke good feelings, like urban furniture that can prompt children's imagination and creativity, or features like trees and plants that can stimulate children's senses, are related to healthy lifestyles or allow them to relax and find calm, while others, for example as ornamental facades, are beautiful to see. However, the features may also evoke undesirable feelings, such as disgust on a street with rubbish and dirt, or upset children traveling on neglected footpaths lacking of any maintenance. Similarly, in the image on the right, I highlighted a few relevant features of children's sensorial experience as trees and rubbish. Other relevant features comprise different types of plants, ornamental facades, as I told you before, litter and dirt, or lack of maintenance. Next slide, please. As a third aspect, I found the perception of risk that consists in the features of the built environment used as cues to infer who could be encountered among the children's routes. Considering that people with a variety of intentions are found in the public realm, these environmental cues serve to deduce the characteristics and behaviors of those individuals. For instance, a few relevant features may include facilities and well-maintained facades indicating the presence of good locals, or lack of maintenance indicating the potential presence of wrongdoers, or parks and playgrounds that attract families with children available for group games. Next slide, please. Lastly, the fear of traffic are the features influencing the perception of risk of being involved in a vehicle accident. A street with several vehicle lanes without signalizing crossings or with poor visibility increase the perception of risk and children's exposition to noise and pollution. Conversely, a street with fewer or without vehicle lanes with pedestrian crossings like the one in the image, or with wide footpaths, improve the perception of safety and are linked to healthy spaces for children. In this case, relevant features with a positive effect include wide footpaths and pavements, narrow streets, well-defined pedestrian crossings, bollards and traffic calming measures. And interestingly, the lack of those features or a modification of them cause the opposite effect. Next slide, please. So the evidence suggests that it's possible to encourage children's trips. How? From landmarks that enrich the experience and facilitate children's learning process, creating networks of landmarks to help children navigate through homogeneous streets, from natural elements that play a key role in the attractiveness of a place, favoring the inclusion of natural and playful elements in children's spaces, from the features that are meaningful, which can be cues to identify risk, causing detours, or even suppress trips. Therefore, identifying and transforming the physical features that hinder trips may be relevant. And from traffic calming features that increase children's traffic safety, preferring traffic-related features that protect children while they learn how to deal with cars. Next slide, please. So what I just showed you were the findings of the first part of the research, and the current stage of the research has the objective of knowing the combined relevance of the different aspects of the built environment by investigating the reactions of children and caregivers to different constructed environments. To this, I'm using a discrete choice experiment as a stated preference. For this purpose, I designed a survey, a stated preference survey, to use the features I showed you before, and I'm inviting caregivers and their children to answer a web-based questionnaire. If schools or local authorities are interested in collaborating with the recruitment of parents and their children, please feel free to contact me. The results of this experience will be summarized in a report, including suggestions about the support and encourage children's unaccompanied trips, and how to support and encourage children's unaccompanied trip. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Natan, and thank you for correcting me, giving us the proper example. I won't explain to you how terrible all my Spanish is. On to our final speaker, Greg Woodford, who is the founder of Avanti Cycling. Greg, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much. There we are, my first slide. Brilliant. Good afternoon. My name is Greg Woodford. I'm Director of Avanti Cycling. I used to work for CDC, the National Cyclists Organisation, and now known as Cycling UK, where I manage their on-road training program. So I have quite a wide experience of delivering cycle training programs. Next slide, please. Avanti Cycling is a leading bikeability and cycling activity provider in the south of England. We are bikeability provider this year, 2020. Our ultimate aim, though, is to engage with people to encourage cycling generally, not just about training. We believe that cycling is a great way to improve active travel. I've always said that one of the best ways of traffic calming is to put 10 children on bikes in the middle of the road. You can see drivers stopping for hundreds of yards around you. However, as we know, there are public concerns about cycling as active travel, especially with children cycling. We know the general issues. There's a perception of danger, a perception that it's hard. People think they need to be fit to ride a bike. There is a general lack of understanding about cycling and its benefits, or cycling in general. Drivers feel that cyclists are getting in their way, and therefore there is sometimes bad feeling or even conflict between drivers and cyclists. However, there are also more subtle barriers too. The car is easy. Everyone just puts their car keys and coat by the front door, park their car outside, so everything is just there. Grab the keys, grab the coat, close the front door, and jump in the car. Bikes are often put in the bottom of the garden. Sometimes, somehow, people need to make accessing that bike more easy than accessing the car. As I said before, perception is hard. Cycling is perceived to be hard. We need to encourage the fun and convenience aspects of cycling. There's also been decades of anti-cycling publicity by the authorities and the press. People now perceive cycling as people do not perceive cycling as the go-to method of transport nowadays. People in Holland do, but we don't seem to in England. Next slide, please. What we are doing now, we are playing a small part in encouraging cycling. I have a strong belief that people only cycle if they enjoy it. The negatives outweigh the positive for many people. This needs to be addressed. As I said, we are a major provider of bikeability. For those of you who do not know, bikeability is composed of 3 levels. Most providers simply train to level 2. We firmly believe that level 3 is a vital component in order to encourage children to use their bikes as transport. Next slide, please. Level 2 is a sort of mass rollout. Many of the recipients of that training will never ride their bikes again. Maybe they do in Slough, but certainly not in Reading. Level 3 is a much more targeted intervention. We aim to deliver level 3 to 20% our level 2 participants. Just as a brief, if you observe the slides here, bikeability now is divided into 4 core functions. Training is made into 4 core functions, which are really define how you ride safely down the road. You observe, you communicate, move into the correct position, and you understand priorities. Our courses are 2 full days at level 2 and 1 full day at level 3. We also encourage an optional 4th day. The 4 days enable us to deliver a high quality and fun course. The children are taken on their commuting route to secondary school and given a trip around town. The children love this. They really spend days out of the school on their bike in the sunshine, hopefully. The great thing about what we do in bikeability is we are the first people to give children the ability to make independent decisions in life. Up until we get hold of them, they've been told everything, directed to do stuff, and they don't make independent decisions at all. Next slide, please. However, as you know, training is not the final answer. We need to engage with the parents. Parents struggle to allow their children to the independence to ride to school. We have been trialing a parent and child engagement program in schools over the last year or so. Unfortunately, it has been sort of curtailed by the pandemic, but yes, but when we have rolled it out, it has been extremely successful. Next slide, please. This program is run after school, and we do the following. We teach bike checks and familiarization with the bike. We practice riding parents and children together. We work with them to identify the correct positioning and demonstrate the correct positioning. We discuss and teach the 4 core functions to the parents, show and ride routes, safe routes to school with the children, with their families. In order to be successful, we need full engagement from the school, real publicity to schools and local authorities, and engagement with the child through bikeability. Most of this training is done post bikeability. Next slide, please. The activity needs to be fun. This is vital. I emphasize that again and again. Next slide, please. Here is some feedback from some of the sessions we've run. There is now some funding for this program, but we've been developing it over the last year or so. Next slide, please. The final thing that we do is we have setting up a cycling club for young people. It struck me that once we've finished training children at bikeability, then what do? Do they stop cycling? How can we maintain that joy that we see the children have in bikeability, reflecting bikeability? So we're setting up a young people cycling club. This is about engaging young people post bikeability, simply to share the fun of cycling. The club is for the young and run by the young people. We will simply provide instructors and leaders and train and invest money to train up volunteers. And it's purely leisure club, not aimed at racing, but at fun. There'll be fun activities interspersed with training. Next slide, please. This is sort of things that we'll be doing with them. Okay, and next slide, please. So this is what our engagement, fun rides, training support, parent engagement, working on breaking down the myths, advice on bikes generally, and where to do and what to do. The big thing is, as you may have understood, is that I feel that it's to make cycling fun. If people start enjoying what they're doing, then they will pick it up as active travel and enjoy that as well. The benefits must outweigh the perception of danger. Final slide, please. Thank you very much, all. This is me, Greg Woodford, and I'll field some questions at the end.
Fantastic, thank you, Greg. And you will indeed have questions to answer. We have plenty of questions and probably more than we'll be able to get through. But if I could invite all of the panel to join again, please. Turning on your webcam and your microphone, we'll get into these questions. We have some batches of questions on different subjects. We're hopefully going to cover engagement, enforcement, changes to the local road system in light of COVID, safety. Hopefully we'll get onto all of those topics. We're going to start with a batch of questions on engagement, which I'll share with all of the panel, share all the questions with all of the panel, and then I will perhaps come to Alison, you first. So we have one question about from a local authority who has recently found it difficult to set up a school street and found it difficult to get volunteers involved. Perhaps a concern of the volunteers that they may even be met with aggression in some cases when actually physically manning the school street at the start of the day. What information and advice could we provide on that subject? Then, sorry, I'll give you a few and then I'll get everyone time to think, and then Alison, I'll come to you first on, I think, particularly that subject. A couple of other quick subjects. One is on any positive engagement examples with local politicians. And thirdly, any tips on reaching students and parents directly, particularly as there might be extremely stressed and busy teachers and staff in the school teams at the moment. So how can we reach students and parents directly on this subject of active travel to school? And Alison, I will come to you first, and as I do, would you also mind sharing if there's anywhere that people can find support from Sustrans? That's an extra question we'd be asking. Over to you, Alison.
Hi. So on the volunteers, through our work across London, we're actually supporting lots of boroughs with training the volunteers ready for the delivery of the school streets. So we run a session where we take show them how to use the barriers, but we actually go out to the site and we talk through a lot of different scenarios, giving them some positive ones, but also some more challenging ones. And we found through that training that actually what happens is that the volunteers are normally very local to the situation, and those volunteers will really often know specifically who they think is going to be aggressive. It's actually much more detailed than you think. And so we can talk through, well, they're going to say this. Well, if that's the reaction from those people, then we would suggest saying this, or we would suggest maybe talking to them about what their options are, how they can move around it. So we have been offering that training. A lot of it's very site specific, dependent on where the road is and how that road works. Recruiting volunteers is proving really challenging. What we've done in a lot of cases is worked with schools staff initially, and then we've said when the parents come and they're kind of like, oh, this is nice, saying, oh, would you mind staying and supporting this? And that's kind of worked quite well so far. But yeah, it is quite challenging recruiting volunteers, and I definitely think that the other thing that I should say on that actually is we need to make sure that we're doing the right level of engagement, because if we're not doing the engagement beforehand with local residents, then we are going to get angry. People don't know and they feel like something's taken away from them, then that can create some problems. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alison. And perhaps also, Greg, would you add to this subject on how to engage with perhaps the parents of the children who are travelling to schools?
Engage with the parents. We need to bring the children of the school on board, and because we don't have access to the parents generally outside the holiday courses. But yes, it's about bringing the school, and we have a great school, and we do have quite a few great schools. We can access the parents, and they can see the benefit. I think that's the key. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to access parents without databases which you can't access, things like that. So yeah, so schools are the key at this moment in time.
Can I just add on this, on that, Chris, that throughout lockdown, we've continued to work with the schools that we work with, and we've sent them at-home work that they've been doing with their parents. But we've also run a social media challenge where we've been asking young people to message about the benefits of walking and cycling in little videos. And I mean, the next level, they're brilliant. They're better than anything we could have produced. And that's worked really well to just keep those messages going through the time when we've not been face-to-face delivering.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'll come to Team Atkins on that question as well, particularly perhaps on local politicians, as they are your clients. What examples have you seen there of the positive engagement where the elected officials join in on this subject? You don't have to name names.
No, I think it's really keeping elected members abreast of what's going on in their particular patch or ward, and perhaps giving them the opportunity to get involved with liaising with schools. So I know it's not possible now because of COVID restrictions, but actually doing a photo op, so that the elected members are there with the school that's had great success, and getting them to buy in and actually be part of the encouragement and motivation process.
Yeah, and understanding local motivations for wanting this really is just, why is it that local people are interested in this? As an elected representative, they need to represent all of the people, so they need to understand both the concerns and the interests. So it's helping them along that path, and helping them maybe also figure out how to best frame that discussion for their discussions with others.
And is it the case that there's a combination of some elected officials are the ones really pushing this agenda, who've already understood the the challenges of travel in the local area and the problems that traffic are causing to people's lives, and perhaps and they're really striving for the lowest traffic neighbourhoods possible. And then are there some officials who are sort of playing catch up, who are a bit behind the community? What's your experience?
Happy to take that, Adrienne.
Yeah, I mean, I can do that. Yeah, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, you will have elected members who are pro sustainable transport. You will have some that are pro car, and you know, that plays to advantages and disadvantages. So elected members can actually champion the benefits and the cause of getting sustainable transport in place, and then it's a case of maybe educating might be the wrong word here, but just highlighting the benefits to the elected members that are not so much on board, and getting them to think around the benefits, and explaining that it's just not the transport benefits. There are health benefits, public health benefits, cost and maybe image as well, benefits as well. So it's, you know, that every situation's got its pros and cons. So it's working with you know, the elected members that are kind of you know, got a yes next to them, ticks to their name, and then working with the ones who just need that little bit more coaxing round to the benefits.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Imogen and Tara and Juliana, for your questions in that batch. And we're going to move on to enforcement and infrastructure, which I will certainly come to you, Natan, on this topic. We have questions on how it is possible outside of London that vehicles can be excluded from school streets if there's no camera enforcement or policing, and a question on the opinions you have on the importance of hard and soft measures between re-engineering the streets through to a solely engagement approach. And Natan, you spoke about the role that the local environment has on children's well-being as well. So perhaps you could start us off, Natan, and I'll come to the rest of the panelists on what role you see the changing the local infrastructure will have on enabling school streets and safer travel.
So regarding the first question and the hard and soft measures, I found that there are several hard measures that could be done. For example, reducing the number of streets of vehicle lanes in a street that reduces traffic, or creating these badges that reduce the number of vehicle lanes when they reach to the crossing, so it makes the crossing more accessible, and that's perceived by parents and children, by caregivers and children, as safer. So that's just a few example of a hard measure. Or for example, landmarks that will make it easy to children to connect, but nevertheless they could find other landmarks that will make them find a way to find their routes, or how to move along a neighborhood that is quite homogeneous. Regarding the soft measure, that's very interesting, and is very complex in a sense that I show you some things regarding the built environment. And in the built environment, one specific that is very interesting is the environmental cues for risk. So some elements that children and caregivers pick from the environment and start linking to dangerous strangers or people that could misbehave or whatever. For example, the dirt or rubbish that you will find on the streets, or facades that are not well maintained, and they start picking that. So that could be from one side. First, hard measures of how to correct the things and make, for example, facades, or help reduce the dirt and rubbish that you will find on the street, or working with children and communities to actually teach them how they perceive their area around, because many of them are not well aware of which people they could find or where they could go, because they start having prejudice towards the environment, and that way they start thinking who they will expect to find in the streets. I know if that makes sense in a way. There's another huge part of my work that I didn't talk much, and it's about the social environment, because people and what the children encounter in the street also affect where they go, so how they go, and that's also like a soft measure, but in a sense is kind of a cultural, so it's harder in the end. And
yes,
I didn't catch very well.
Sorry, I was just going to add, there's some fantastic research in that was done in Bristol on the level of social connections that people have in streets where there is a low level of traffic versus busy streets, and there's a very tangible difference in the number of friendships that people have on their streets when there are lower traffic levels. So thank you, Nathan. And I wanted to ask this, it's a very difficult question. If perhaps there's not the money or available to put in things like cameras, how can we ensure that everybody will abide by the rules when we've got now, there's kids walking down the street in the middle of the road, when we've got school streets taking place? How can we be sure that we won't have one motorist who either knowingly or unknowingly comes along the street? Perhaps I saw some nodding from Marla there. I'm not sure if that's an indication that you want to answer the question. Shall I come to you?
So I was just thinking about the design of the street, perhaps. So road markings just came into my mind. Take away the road markings, so it actually encourages motorists to actually slow down, which is something that you might do if you see a camera. It's an automatic reaction. So something around the design of the street perhaps could encourage a more inclusive street and encourage active travellers to have priority. So something about the road markings, the surface of the road as well.
Any other panelists, would you like to come in on this? Greg, I see a hand far away.
So I go back to my comment about bikeability. If you put 10 children in the middle of the road cycling, it calms traffic for miles. If you get the children in the street walking and cycling, even if there is somebody driving through it, they will go really, really, really slowly. And maybe look at the way the Hollanders, the examples from Holland, when they take away the pavements and just make the streets open for all.
And Alison, did you want to add? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. In what we've been doing a lot of in London is using these plastic barriers with people, and that's just, it's a very temporary thing, and planters, they're a sort of low cost way, but obviously Marla's example of like making the space feel different, I think is a really good thing. If you can do that, I think if it can feel like there's a different priority, that would be potentially better. Yeah.
Great, thank you all. Now I'm going to see if we can get in more than one batch of questions remaining. So there's one topic we really have to address, which is on the recent changes to streetscape and the impact of COVID-19. And so the questions are, what opinions do you have on whether the COVID-induced staggered start times may affect local travel issues? Are local authorities, highway teams concerned that school streets will displace cars and cause other traffic issues? And whilst schools are, struggling with so many stipulations and attendance is a challenge, how can we properly incentivize and run air quality audits and competitions during this time? So thank you, Joe and Caroline, for those, and Rachel for those questions. I'll perhaps come to you first, Adrienne, on those, particularly with the example of Slough and the staggered start times.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. I'm not sure that we have much information about that yet, but it does appear to be contributing somewhat to let's say, like less of a peak hour. There are sort of it seems to be working okay. So preliminary data from the our colleagues in buses do seem to be suggesting that there haven't been many issues. I know there was before the additional services and duplicate services started, there was concern about the potential for buses to literally leave pupils behind at the bus stands, bus stops, and nobody really wanted to do that. Sounds pretty terrible. And so far, it hasn't really happened, hasn't really come to fruition. So it does seem to be, let's say, things seem to be aligning in favor of safer travel without leaving pupils behind, and probably it's a combination of factors, including the staggered start times, as well as duplication of services and pavement, providing additional pavement space for walking and cycling. So that does seem to be working. I'll actually also, if I may, respond to the concern about traffic displacement. I know that there was, with the low traffic neighborhoods in Walthamstow that were put in as part of the mini Holland projects, I know there was a lot of concern about traffic displacement, but there's actually a phenomenon known as, I think it's called evaporation, where the traffic just is literally decreased. There is just less traffic generally overall in those areas where you are implementing similar to school streets, timed closures and physical infrastructure to prevent vehicles from traveling down certain roads. So it's kind of fascinating, but it is something that actually does happen, that there is less displacement than one might assume.
I think that's a really interesting example, obviously, that happened whilst we didn't have the restrictions on public transport that we have at the moment. I think that's a really difficult challenge for low traffic neighbourhoods at the moment, who are trying to shift people from one mode of transport to another, but without one of the major options being as available as it previously was. Alison, can I come to you on this question? What do you hear about any concerns of traffic just being displaced and perhaps causing problems elsewhere when certain streets are closed?
Yeah, you hear a lot about it when you're talking about closing the road. There's an awful lot of concern about it, but when it's implemented, definitely you need to give road closures a little bit of time to settle in as well. Like day one, week one, I know a lot of the schools that we've been working with have been like, oh, week one's quite challenging, but actually as it settles in, as I don't know, I think it was maybe in Marla's presentation, most primary school children live within 2 miles of their school. That journey becomes difficult by car. It suddenly becomes easier option to just walk because it's not very far. So yeah, and there's more concern about it than the reality of it, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's what we all hope for. And I guess that there is this really difficult challenge right now with the lack of public transport as an option. Greg and Natan, would you like to jump in on this topic of how do we cope with this, the extra challenge that COVID is throwing at us when we're seeing the need to enable people to travel around by bike or on foot with lower public transport opportunities, but at the same time, for some people, driving is the way that they have to get around, and we have to try and marry up the two options of active travel and driving. What do you see happening? What solutions do you think are available? Natan, you're nodding, so I'll come to you first.
Well, that's really interesting, because from the evidence I found in my research, there's inevitably children and caregivers will find different ways of walk and interact with the public spaces that are not completely understood today because of the pandemic. What I know, for example, is pre-pandemic, so things probably change. I would expect, nevertheless, that it will be more connected with how the changes to relate to which people they will encounter and how to avoid people in that sense. So probably, this is all like it's a bit of a speculation, because I insist we need evidence to know what happens in Children's and Parents Month. But I would expect that suddenly footpaths will start feeling very, very narrow, in essence, because they will have to share with other people, and they need more space to, if they are very scared of getting infected, to have space to walk across the street, along the street, down the street, to don't be infected by someone that is around, or if there is a very busy place that has their own issues. One of the things I did not show related to the social environment, there's some perception of safety, because when children moves in busy places with a lot of people, they will feel like there's nothing terrible will happen to them, but at the same time something could happen because there's a lot of people, and we'll expect something else add to this related to COVID. So in a sense, I think, as I insist, we need more evidence to know if how public transport and walking is affected by this, and how to actually encourage walking and children walking to schools or places in this current pandemic.
Thank you. And Greg, as I come to you, I'm just going to actually cheekily throw in one question, because we've struggled to get to the issue of safety, but I think this one was also made for you. Is the fear of traffic the same in children as adults? Does it exist, or is it a fear that the parents pass on, or is it just a parental fear and the children are not afraid at all? So perhaps as you respond to the COVID question, you might also reflect on that, and then we will close this this session down.
Okay, so COVID is a challenge, and as you pointed out, I think there's the huge risk is that people are just going to revert to their cars because they can't go on public transport, etc. And the other risk is that once you drop out of the habit of using public transport, you won't get back into it. So my fear is that we have lots of buses running around. Most of them are empty at the moment. They're going to stay empty for the future, even once COVID-19 is gone. Local authorities need to rise that challenge. We all need to rise that challenge. We need to offer the opportunity to ride and walk into work or school or other transport. Currently, I think one of the big differences is that fewer people are commuting to work, and that is a huge difference. And I think that has to, we have to. I think businesses are going to start thinking that people can work from home. They trust their employees to work from home now. That will be, so we go back to the recycle maximum. The first thing is reduce. We have to reduce traffic overall, I think, and then use look at putting other traffic into other areas like cycling and walking. It is a challenge, but local authorities need to rise that challenge, and so many are at the moment, and the government is certainly looking at it. And many, I think, it could be very optimistic for the future for us. Safety was probably more my area of expertise. Yes, I feel that it is provided to the children. The fear of traffic is provided to the children from the parents. It's a parental thing. Children pick up on parental fears hugely. How many parents, for example, do you see who keep the children away from the edge of the pavement when they're walking? Most parents do, and just a general thought, just general moving children gently away from the traffic into the edge of the pavement towards the houses, away from the curb edge, provides some fears for the children already. I mean, I used to teach swimming as well, and you always knew if the parent was scared of water, the child would be scared of water as well. It's not something they do on purpose, consciously. It's a subconscious thought, subconscious sort of transfer of feelings between parent and child. We do our best, and by the time they finish with us, children tend not to be scared of roads, but they have a greater understanding of how to deal with them. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Greg. And we have reached the end of our session today. Thank you for those wise words at the end. And it just remains for me to say that the video of this session will be available to all viewers, be sent to you all in a few hours and then put on the YouTube channel. I must thank Atkins for making this session possible. And most importantly, thank all of the speakers for participating. So thank you, Marla and Adrienne and Alison and Natan and Greg. Thank you all, and we can all wave goodbye. Thank you all.